Thank you, Nancy. Like I told Nancy, I know more about me than she does, and rather than put her up on the spot and try to remember names and dates and things like that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Mike Rice. I'm a native of Polk County. I went to Cedartown High School. I graduated in 1966, and I've always been interested in history. And this Indian thing I started all kinds of hobbies, coins, stamps, like most young boys or young girls even have hobbies, doll collecting. And I just couldn't seem to find anything that clicked, you know. And then my uncle bought 3 lots on Lake Weiss when they backed the water up. And I was helping him build a boat dock one day, and I reached down in the mud and picked up an arrowhead, and a light bulb went off. I said, "Gee whiz, that's pretty, you know, that's neat." And he said, "Oh yeah, they're all up and down the river here." So that spurred me on right then. I just quit building the boat dock, got in the boat, and went and started looking for arrowheads. And so it became a lifelong passion. Really, it started there, and it carried on years and years and years after that. But I've always enjoyed history. One thing I heard Miss Brewster mention about the great expenditures that you had in the budget, so I'll neglect to mention that I work for the power company, and but I have to pay a power bill like everybody else, so I won't sidetrack you on that. And I understand it's been a long, hot summer. But all my stuff is in the back, so at some point in time we'll probably need to turn our chairs around if it won't be too much trouble. And I'll get started on. I brought a lot of interesting things I think to share with you about Indians. But I can start by saying that the late John F. Kennedy, he made a statement that the American Indian was the most misunderstood race of people that have ever lived on this face of the earth. Their culture was so varied. Their language was so varied. They might be a tribe living within 50 miles of each other, and they spoke a totally different dialect. It's almost like Chinese and American. It was just totally different, and they had pride in the fact of that they didn't want to. They wanted to be an individual, and they thought very much of their dignity, and they were great hunters and conservationists. And most people think of them as being savages and heathens, but they were very religious people. They believed in the Great Spirit. The Wakantanka is what the Plains Indians call that. The Great Spirit was their God, and the earth was the Mother Earth. She provided everything for them. And we have a lot to learn from the Indian in his environmentals, because once he lived in an area and he moved on to another area, he left the land just like he found it. And that's in its sad shape that we can look at our country today and see the pollution in the water system and the air we breathe and the food we eat, how we have damage to our own environment. But the Indians, I can truthfully say, did everything they could to preserve it for as long as they had it. But Asa Pryor, if you'll notice at the plaque down at the spring, was the original pioneer who came into this land in 1834 and purchased the large tract of land, including the Big Springs and the Cedar Creek Basin. And so there were Cherokee Indians living in the area at that time, and they supposedly won this area from the Creek Indians over a ball game. The Indians played ball, and they were notorious gamblers, and so they had a big competitive ball game, and the Cherokees won this area from the Creek Indians. So Asa Pryor bought it, and then someone, I can't remember the guy's name now, Walthall, W-A-L-T-H-A-L, he established a trading post here. So the Indians would still have their ceremonies and festivals in the spring area down there, and it still was a large focal point for their social gatherings and things that they had. And then we all know about the Trail of Tears in 1848, when they got all the Cherokee people up and herded them up and put them on the wagons, and most of them walked to Oklahoma, you know, when about half the men and women and older people died on the way out there. So there's a long and tragic history in Indians in our area, but there's also a colorful part of the Indian life before white men became associated with them, because they lived in a Garden of Eden. And in the Coosa Valley area, Polk County in general, is blessed with so many great natural waters, natural springs flowing. And I think that encouraged the Indians to live here. And I know it encouraged the white men to buy the land because of that. And I'm sure the game was plentiful. So that was one thing that the Indian had to have, just like we have to have today, was food, clothing, and shelter. And fresh water is so very important to us, even with the pollution that we're finding in our own big springs now with the benzene and everything. But at one time, Big Cedar Creek was pure enough to drink from, if you can imagine that, because the whole basin, the whole drainage area is spring fed, and I'm sure it was probably pure enough you could just drink your cup of water right out of the Big Cedar Creek. if you'll be kind enough now to turn your chairs around, and I'll go through some of the things that I've brought to show you. Supposedly Homo sapiens, as we know them, they were almost ape-like creatures, and I don't believe in the evolutionary theory. I don't believe we evolved from apes. I believe in God, and He created us, but they were similar to ape people. They were hairy, they were stocky built, but they did develop enough intelligence to develop tool making. And this is just a standard creek rock from the flatwoods in Alabama, and the Indians knocked off some of the chippings there on the face of this rock, and that was used just by the hand tool, just for chopping. And that was the earliest known tool. Like I say, it's very similar to the ones Dr. Leakey found in Africa, and he's dated them to be 2 million years old. You can pass that around if you like. And that, when I first found that, I thought it was just a defect, like an Indian he was starting to make something, but he didn't finish it, you know. But I've gotten books from archaeologists in the state, University of Georgia, stating that that's called a pebble tool. It was just a common thing they would pick up and knock a few flakes off and turn it into a chopping tool. You could actually cut a piece of meat or a deer or something, dismember a deer with that one tool right there. This is a cow horn spoon. The Indians didn't have cows, but they, of course, there were buffalo in Georgia at one time. There were also camels in Georgia years and years ago, believe it or not. The camels migrated to Asia across the Bering Land Strait like the Eskimos migrated, or the Siberian migrated over to here. But camels were native to Georgia as well as bison. But this is just an example of how a tool that the Indian would use. He wouldn't have your silver flatware. This would be his day-to-day eating utensil. And it's a hollowed out cow horn with braided horsehair. That would be his, he could keep up with it. He could even wear it around his neck, if he wanted to. And that way you wouldn't lose it. But the wife, the woman would usually do the braiding. She would also do the cooking and the preparing of the food. If I had a choice to be an Indian man or an Indian woman, I would be the man, because the woman really had a tough life. You get up in the morning, there's no curling irons, there's no hot water to take a shower, there's no quick microwavable stuff to throw in the microwave. Everything had to be done from scratch, literally. The husband, he's like the man of today. He was probably a late sleeper, and he depended on her to get up and prepare the morning meal if there was anything to eat. But she usually find nuts and berries, and they always had a fresh supply of that. And hopefully they would have meat, but there was no refrigeration. So what they didn't eat on a day's basis, the only preservation they could do was smoke it, like jerky, beef jerky, or smoked salmon or whatever. But of course the women would prepare the clothing. The man would go out and kill a deer, and he would bring it home and throw it down on the ground, and she would skin the deer, take the hide, flesh it out, and soften the hide. She would chew the hide with her teeth to make the leather pliable so the men could wear clothing out of it. So the first thing that would go out would be her teeth. That was the worst thing a woman could lose, would be her teeth, and we still have that affliction today. I've got 8 or 9 crowns and 2 or 3 bridges and everything else. And so, but you had to have good teeth to survive if you were an Indian. But the man, he was look what he had. He had hunting and fishing at leisure. There was no game laws, but they were strict about they only killed and ate what they needed. But he had the life of Riley, so to speak.
Where did we go wrong?
Well, a lot of people have asked that. There's a transition there somewhere. I mean, he hunted and fished at leisure. He had to defend of course, he had to defend his homeland and his home. But his main concern was just providing food for his family, and all the other burdens fell on the woman to have the children, to raise the children, to cook the food. So I would have much rather have been a man, I'm sure, in Indian way of life. But I was getting back to the teeth, and I'll show you.
Did you find that?
No, this was a modern reproduction of what the sad part about lots of the things that I have found is that they used a lot of wood in their day-to-day life. And of course, that's deteriorated and rotted over the years, you see. And about the only thing that you'll find is shell or stone or some bone implements that have been preserved over the years. But the braided horsehair would have been long gone. And of course, probably the cow horn might have survived over the eons of time. But that's that's the thing about Indians. They had no written history until later on when the Cherokees had the first written alphabet. Sequoyah, he introduced that to the Cherokee Nation. But all the other Indians, they had written language, but it was in sign form, like on buffalo skins and things like that. And so we really don't know a lot about them other than what the archaeologists have found in their excavations and what they can assume really happened. But a lot of it's still very dark and distant. We don't know really what happened about their on their day-to-day life. But we do know that they loved corn and they picked berries and nuts and things like that. And this is called a nutting stone. You can see the little round indentions in the top of the stone, and that would be used for putting a hickory nut or a walnut up there and keeping it from rolling off. Then they would take, this is called a pedestal or mano, and then they would pound on those and crack the hickory nuts. And there again, you're going to get some grit in with the pulp of the meat. But really the bad part about it was they did grow corn. It was called maize. And it wasn't like Silver Queen or any of this good corn that we have today. It almost looked like a pine cone. It was so short, the ears were. But they would use that, and they would put the kernels of corn in there and grind it like that. And it would make cornmeal. But in doing so, small particles of this pumice or this rock would get mixed in with the cornmeal. And over a period of years, after eating Mom's homemade cornmeal, that sandpaper effect with the ground up stone in there would wear their teeth down to the gum lines. And so archaeologists have found several skeletal remains with like on a 30-something-year-old Indian with no teeth from eating that ground up cornmeal. And of course the women day-to-day chewing on the leather is really tough. So I wouldn't recommend that on a partial or anything, because it's going to really take its toll. But that was the worst medical affliction that the Indian had, was tooth decay, because there wasn't any dental floss or anything. They didn't have a lot of sugar things though. There wasn't any candy other than they used honey, natural honey for a sweetener, and honey locust pods. But surprisingly, they had relatively sound teeth. But just the day-to-day wear and tear of chewing bones and gristle and sinew and stone ground cornmeal, if you live past 35, you were considered an old elder in the tribe. And so thank God today for modern medicine. We can look at it. Some of us probably in the room, you're probably some of at least 50 at least, So, and even maybe one or two a little older than that. But I'm glad to live in a society where we do have modern medicine and things to look, because if they had an infection, if they got hurt and broke a leg and they got infected, a lot of times they would die from just the infection caused by the wound, you see. The first thing that we think about when we think of Indians is arrowheads. You find those, that's the most common thing that you find if you're out walking in a plowed field. Now these are some of the ones that I've found over the years, some of my better ones, and I put them in this case to keep them from getting knocked around. I first put them in a cigar box, and I would prowl around through, I'd shuffle them around, and they are fragile, and they will break, and I started finding pieces broken off, so I bought this display case. But you can see the color and the varied colors of the type of flint that was used. And you can look at these. I'll set these right here like that. But you ask yourself, how did they make the arrowheads? What is flint? And flint is a natural glass. It's nature's way of making glass, and it has the same geological structure as glass. The Indians, how they knew this, I don't know, but somewhere down the line, somebody figured out a way to make an arrowhead, and there's two ways you do that. There's an old theory that you would heat you'd heat the rock and drop water on it. You couldn't do that, because if you've ever heated a marble, like some of you girls might have made jewelry, you take a marble and heat it and drop it in water and it crystallizes, just shatter almost. So that wouldn't work on a piece of flint to make an arrowhead. But there's two methods, and I'm going to tell you what they are in making an arrowhead. This is called a hammerstone. And if you walked over that in a plowed field, you might not even catch your eye. But that's one of the main tools that the Indian would use in chipping an arrowhead. And this is called a flint nodule, which is just a big flat river rock. And on the outside, it has a rough-looking rind, what we call a rind, like a watermelon look. But on the inside is pure brown flint. And he would take this hammerstone and strike this. I'm not going to do it. but take my word for it. And this is actually a flake that came off of this rock. And it's almost ready to be made into an arrowhead now. You can see where these large flakes were taken off from taking a hammerstone and popping the rock. And it's called conchoidal fracture. That's a scientific word, and I didn't really know what it meant, but glass or flint has a conchoidal fracture point. And now the Indian didn't know what conchoidal fracture was. He just knew that when he struck a rock with a rock, a piece of it popped off. But that's geologists and archaeologists have decided that that's what that's called, conchoidal fracture, and you can do it with a piece of a wine bottle. It'll do the same thing because it has the same characteristics as glass. So he pops off these big flakes, like the one you're passing around. And this is very similar. This is a gray one that was popped off. And then he would take, to get that roughness out and get the thickness down to where he could work it, he would take his hammerstone and just peck away. And those little flakes come right off. Just chip, 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 chip away. And once he gets it down to a piece like that brown piece you're passing around, he would put his hammerstone down and he would take a piece of deer antler like that right there. And on an arrowhead, you can put pressure on the back side and the flake will pop off on the opposite side. That's going back to that conchoidal fracture. You're putting pressure here and the flake pops off from the other side. So the Indian figured that out. Somehow, or eons of time, figured out, well, that'll work if we do this. So then he figured it out, and there have been blades found at Etowah 28 inches long, an eighth of an inch thick. So they were master craftsmen, master flint knappers. And to find a blade, and to have a blade that's 28 inches long, you got to start with a piece of rock as big as a car hood almost. It's got to be huge to beat that thing down, to have the raw material to work with. And archaeologists today don't know how that they did that with just a piece of stone and a deer antler. So it's amazing, but they did it. The Indians didn't have native metal other than what they could find on the ground, like native copper nuggets that we find. And this is the closest thing they had to an iron tool. And this is called hematite. And it's a native material that we find right here in Polk County, but maybe not to this iron ore like the Polk County is known for, this iron ore mine years ago. All the red clay you see now, a lot of the landfill, the old landfill was an iron ore mine at one time. But this is what they were looking for, hematite. And the Indians made a groove around this big nugget right here and made an axe. That's a hematite axe. And this one didn't come from Polk County. It came from Missouri. But they have been hematite axes found. And I'll let you pass that one around. You can feel the weight of that. That's heavy. And that's almost a pure iron ore nugget right there. This is a piece of water oak that I found growing wild, and I saw a war club very similar to this in a history book. And so this is a natural curl where there was a honeysuckle vine growing around this was a small sapling, a young tree growing up, and the honeysuckle vine had twisted it off right there. And I just thought, boy, that'd make a neat walking stick. So when I cut it off, it was about 4 foot longer than this, but I thought, well, that's just not going to work. So then something just, a light bulb went off, and I said, boy, that'd be a neat war club. And so it looks like a human femur if you look at it, in certain respects. It looks like a human femur, but it's solid and it has balance. And I'm sure the Indians, they found the Plains Indians, a lot of their tools have survived because, of course, they lived, out on the west and it was dry and everything out in the plains. And they made a lot of, and they made wooden implements up until the early 1900s. So a lot of these clubs like this are in the Smithsonian right now. So you can go back in history books and get representative examples of what they look like. But that's I'm sure the women won't appreciate this, and maybe their husbands wouldn't want to even have something like that around, like a rolling pin. But if the men you could feel the haft on that and the balance, and that's what the Indian would carry in battle. And it has a rawhide thong on it, where you can put it on your hand. And if you were riding a horse or running, you could your hands would be free, but your club would still be right by your side for battle. So that's just an example of something I made. Now for the women, we've got the war club going around for the men. You're going to make your husband a nice leather war shirt. So you can't go up to the mall and buy one. You got to make it yourself. He's furnished you with a raw hide. You got to flesh it, scrape the fat off. You got to tan it and get the hair, scrape the hair off. You got to chew it with your teeth to soften it. And then you got to sew it because it takes 2 deer hides to make a shirt. One for the front and one for the back. And then you have your neck piece where you have your neck, where your head comes out. But this is a turkey wing bone. That would be your sewing needle. And this is your whetstone. You can see all these little grooves and notches in this rock. And it's because this is a natural rock that I found on a village site. And I know that that's what it was used for, as an awl sharpener. And there's a little groove, it's like a little whetstone. This rock is sandstone, much like the rock that they grind their corn with, but it also serves a multi-purpose as it acts as an awl sharpener. And all these little grooves and notches in there were caused from use over the years for sharpening these little bone needles. And this is an authentic bone needle that was found in an archaic shell mound. So that the polish on that bone is preserved. That's what's giving it this preservation like that. Some things do survive simply because of its durability. That's the whetstone that goes with it. I showed you the metal axe, and this is a stone axe. This is a personal find of mine. My father-in-law owned a lakefront lot it was the creek front lot. It was on Big Cedar Creek, almost at the junction of where the Coosa River and the Big Cedar Creek join. And across the creek there was a plowed field, and so I was fishing one day and got bored. I wasn't catching anything, so I thought, well, I'm going to paddle a boat over across the creek over there and walk around that plowed field. And as luck would have it, I found this granite grooved axe. And grooved axes are not common to this area. The axes you find around here are chipped out of this kind of rock like this, chipped tomahawks or axes. And this is out of the Flatwoods in Alabama. This is called Flatwoods Church. And but this is fine grained granite right here. So possibly this axe was even traded. They had extensive trade routes. And if you think of it as a highway system, like we think of I-20 and I-75, how quick we can go from place to place. Well, the waterways were the Indians' interstate highways. You can get in Big Cedar Creek right here today or tomorrow. Let's just say we're going on a canoe trip, and you get in Big Cedar Creek in your canoe, and how long you decide, how hard you want to work or how hard you want to paddle, you can wind up in Mobile Bay in a matter of weeks, because the Big Cedar Creek ties into the Coosa River. The Coosa River joins the Tallapoosa River, which forms the Alabama River, which runs right into Mobile Bay. So that was the Indians' extensive trade route. He used the waterways. If you go up the Coosa River, the Oostenaula and the Etowah fork. So there's another branch in the highway system. You go all the way up into North Georgia up on the Chattahoochee. The Etowah goes up into Canton. So that was the Indians' highway, and they had extensive trade routes. They would walk for miles and miles and days and months. I used to have a shell medallion that we found, and it had to come from the Gulf Coast. It's a piece of conch shell. And I found it in Taylorsville in Bartow County. So we know that those Indians had to go down to Florida, or somebody had to walk up here from Florida and trade them some shells for something that they didn't have. You might want to pass that around. That's the grooved axe, much like the metal axe that we were passing around, but that one's made out of stone. And that one's made out of, that's chip stone. You can feel the sharp edge. That's the thing about stone, it never loses its sharpness. Or a metal knife, if we dropped our pocket knife out of our pocket by mistake, in a year's time it would be unrecognizable almost. It'd be so corroded with rust. But these things are 4,000 or 5,000 years old, and they look just like they did the day the Indian made it. And he left it on the ground. And it's even still, you can feel the sharpness. You could tie that to a stick, and I guarantee you cut a deer up with it right now. And that's a flint knife. Now, a lot of people would find that and think that's an arrowhead. They'd go, oh, that's not a very good example because it's crooked. But this was an Indian's pocket knife. And of course, the women used this extensively to cut the hide. The Indian man, he didn't take the hide off the deer. He usually didn't take the intestines out. He brought the whole animal in and said, here, honey, this is for supper. And so she gets her flint knife out of her little knapsack there, and then she goes to work on it. While he goes up there and sits by the fire and maybe lights a peace pipe. And you're still asking the question, where did we go wrong? But something happened down the way, and that's a flint knife. And it's as sharp, I could show you a demonstration. I cut notebook paper. It looked like a piece of scissors. I showed it to some school kids, and that is as sharp today as it was the day it was made. It would just cut like a razor. So you could cut the hide off a deer with that with very little problem. Once you got the hide off the deer, you got to cut it up. You got to butcher it. And this is a stone Sept, spelled C-E-L-T, and that's been shaped that way. That's not a natural rock you'd find in the water. It's been shaped just to fit your hand. And if you hold it in your hand, you can just almost feel like, boy, that feels good, you know. And it was made for that way. And that way they could chop. That was their meat cleaver. That was their meat cleaver. My brother and I were going to Collinsville one day, and every year they let the water down at Lake Weiss for flood control. And we used to walk the shorelines and pick up a lot of these artifacts. So we'd been to Collinsville, Alabama to trade day, and we had our nice clothes on. And the shoreline was, we stopped, I just had the, you know, intuition, like, let's just look right over here. We've never looked over there. And I saw this piece of rock sticking up out in the mud, and I got my real nice shoes on, and I'm trying to walk as gently as I can without sinking up to my knees in the mud. And when I picked that rock up, I went, oh, look, it's a perfect Sept, you know. So then I got back out of the water as gingerly as I could out of the mud, and I looked down, and it was about 3 inches so I'm kicking the mud off my feet, and my shoe goes out in the water. I just punt it like that, and I go, boy, that was real stupid, wasn't it, you know? So I pulled up my britcher legs in and had to wait out there and get my shoes after I found the rock, so I had to sacrifice a little bit that day to get that one. And contrary to popular belief, well, we've always called the Indian the red man, but he is not red. He is olive to even light skin like we are. But the terminology red man came from the fact that when the first colonists came across and landed on the East Coast, the Indians saw these huge boats, and they were so impressed to see, all they'd ever seen was a canoe that might hold 5 or 6 people, and there was a ship holding 150 to 200 people. So they run back to their village, and they put on their finest feathers and their finest skins, and men were just vain, very vain. They used more makeup than the women did. They weren't funny or anything. They thought red looked good, and that's where the terminology red man came from, because this is his makeup dish right here. This is made out of stone, and this was probably a hollow geode at one time. We found them down in Alabama and around here even, that you can take a rock and you can shake it, and it sounds like there's sand in there, and we know then that the inside is hollow. So this probably had sort of a calcium or magnesium type powder in it at one time. And it even has a nice little flat base on it, so it sits just perfect. But then you ask yourself, well, where's the red come from? Is it poke berries? Or no, it wasn't poke berries. But well, where do you get the makeup to put in the little makeup dish? You might want to pass that around. This is show and tell, like at school, I guess. But going back to the hematite again, using all the natural minerals, they used all the natural wood and everything they could find. This is the hematite, just like the big heavy stone axe is made out of. This is a softer version of the hematite. This is called fossiliferous hematite, and it's a natural stone that we find right here in Polk County. And I stumbled upon this one day by accident. I found this rock, and I'll show you the rock that I found. And it was completely covered in mud, because when the water goes down on the backwater, where we used to do all this surface hunting, everything has a layer, a coating of mud on it. And so this particular rock that I found, I got it home and I was washing it on the faucet, and my hands looked like they were bleeding. I said, my God, I've cut myself. But what I was doing was washing the red paint from this rock in the water, in the spigot, and it just started covering me. And I'll show you what happened. So that rock has a special purpose in the fact that it was the one that, this rock is solid hematite. It's through and through, not just on the surface. But the Indian would use a piece of flint, like I'm using a pocket knife. He would take a little piece of flint, he would scratch around there. And the rock that I just showed you, we'll pass it around. You can see that it's got extensive wear on it. I used saliva at one of the schools I did, and the little boy went, yuck, you know, so I'm like, yuck. So I'm going to put a little water on that one. See, they would paint themselves with that. They just cover their entire body, and there's been skeletal remains found that this stuff, it's like, what's DMSO, the stuff you put on for arthritis, that this stuff soaks into the skin down to the bone. And they found skeletal remains that the bones were even red, where they put this stuff on over the years, and the body has absorbed it in there. But all that is this whole rock is you just scratch it, and that's what comes off of it. And that's the one that I found, and you can see the grooves on both sides, and feel, and on each side, feel how smooth that is. There's a cardboard box on there. There we go. I also found that this is a permanent dye. The Indian, I used water, and in one of my talks one day at the school, I just took my hand and just I didn't have a paper towel, and so my wife washed those pants and it didn't come out. So it's a natural dye. You can mix some kind of oil with it, like neat's foot oil, and you can dye clothes or shirts or don't rub your hands on it. So I've tried to keep a paper towel on ready standby.
What did you call that rock that turned in?
Hematite.
But it's a different kind of hematite.
It's a softer hematite. It's not a pure nugget form like the stone, like the big heavy axe. This is a softer version. I was trying to think. Red ochre.
Red ochre.
Yeah, red ochre. Red ochre. Yeah.
Make paint out of red ochre.
Right. That's the same stuff that we use today to make red paint out of. And I scraped some off in a little bottle and kept it for years and years, and I'd use it on my displays, I put neat's foot oil in there and kept it oiled up, and it just gets more red every time you use it. And this is black flint from Bartow County. I worked for the power company. We were digging a power hole one day to put a pole in, digging a hole for the power pole. And the drill bit brought up this piece of black flint, and to look at it like that, you'd think it wasn't anything, but on the inside, it's just perfect black flint. And I found a flint quarry right nearby there, where this stuff was just laying on top of the ground. And that's the way the Indian would find a lot of this stuff. He didn't have big machineries to dig it up with. He had to just walk along and find different areas. But now they did, once they found a vein, they would dig down under the ground and find deposits of this stuff called flint. So that's what they made the arrowheads and things out of. And a lot of people didn't know, or I didn't even know until later in life, that the Indians used a blowgun. I thought, well, bow and arrow, spear, and I thought blowguns were confined to Tarzan movies, and things like that. The African Aborigines used blowguns. But I have an example of a Cherokee blowgun here that was made by a Cherokee Indian, and he told me the history on them. I said, oh, that's bamboo. He said, no, that's not bamboo. He said, bamboo is an Asian plant. This is a cousin to it called river cane. The bamboo, like at Coach Ayers' house, you look behind it, and there's pieces of bamboo as big as a man's arm. And it's not native to America, but this cane, river cane, it very seldom ever gets much bigger than a broom handle. And that's what the fishing cane, the old timers made fishing poles out of them. They're perfect for that. And it'll never get much bigger than that. But this has been hollowed out. The only place the cane has a joint in it. That's where you have to ream that out. And you just ask yourself, well, how did they do that? Well, they take a smaller cane with a flint drill on there and just twist. And you say, well, that'd take days. Well, if you don't have an alarm clock to get up by, and if you don't have anybody going, well, you got to make production. You got to do this. And the guy's sitting around the fire going, honey, is supper about ready? He's twisting the cane. He's sitting there. It might take him a week to make this. But, what's a week if he can kill tomorrow's supper with it? And you think, well, that's not very reliable. But I didn't believe it was very reliable either. But this same Cherokee guy showed me these darts. And I said, well, what are they made out of? This is made out of yellow locust. Yellow locust that grows right here in Polk County. And the fletching is made out of Scotch thistle. This is a curse to the farmers. If you've seen it growing out in the fields, it's a beautiful little purple plant, but it's thorns and briars all over it. And it's called Scotch thistle. And I'm assuming it came from Scotland, but it's just a nuisance to the farmers. It's just almost like crabgrass. But when the seed pods bloom out, This is like dandelion. This stuff will float off in the air, and a Scotch thistle plant will be here and here and here and here. But the Indians figured out a way to use that to make. They also use cattail down. Have you ever taken a cattail after it dries out and just twist it and it just kind of just white fluff comes out? They also use that. But I brought my target. I'm going to show you a little demonstration. I hope I don't embarrass myself. But the Indian boys and even the men, this was not, the boys used a blowgun half this length because it was more, you know, it was something they could handle. It's like getting a boy a BB gun compared to a 30-06 rifle. But this is a man's gun. This is, and the Indians, they don't say blowgun. They say this is a gun. This is an 8-foot gun. And I was proud to get it because he told me how long it took him to make it. Now he used a heated rod to go through there and burn the joints out. But the Indian boy would be trained with his little 4-foot gun to go out in the woods, and he had to stalk a wild turkey and shoot the wild turkey on the roost to qualify to become a warrior. That was his next step in becoming a manhood, you see. And so that was, and they also had a game called Touch the Deer. I mean, I'm an avid deer hunter, and I sit for hours and hours and hours. And my wife said, "You're so impatient. How can you do that?" But it's just something about sitting in a deer stand. But the Indians had a game called Touch the Deer to show you that they didn't need these modern compound bows that we have in the 30-06 rifles. They were so precise and just skilled woodsmen that they could actually, by witness, walk up to a deer, stalk up to him, and touch the deer. That was the game that they played called Touch the Deer. So they didn't have to have all these high-powered rifles. But now this gun right here is good for small game like squirrels, rabbits, turkeys, anything that was small enough. You probably could shoot a deer in the eye with it, but more than likely they shot small game. And this was after they learned how to grow crops and things. The first band of Indians wandered and just searched. They didn't have any permanent camps or shelters, you see. They were just small hunter-gatherer bands of people. But after they become established, and the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw especially, formed large village groups, they had time to go out and just hunt for pleasure then instead of necessity. So this became a game to them to see who was the best hunter, who was the best marksman. So I've got a target, and I assure you I have not practiced on this thing. I did some when I first got it. This is that red. See if we can get over here so I don't shoot somebody. I'm not even gonna ask you to move. I'm gonna try to just get right back here where the camera is, and then let y'all hear you'll see the dart and hear it. And it's just like you do. You just put the dart right in the back of and just tack it right down in there. I feel real confident now. I'm going to back up some. So this thing is, you can see, it would kill a small game. So you can see with my imperfection, that almost went through the target right there, and that one almost got a bullseye. But you could kill a rabbit or squirrel with relatively ease with that. And I got the guy to show me how to make this dart, and you think, well, that doesn't look like that'd be too hard to do. But first you got to get this little. He took a block of a yellow locust, just like a block of firewood, and he split that stuff down into like toothpick size. And he took a pocket knife, or an Indian would use that flint knife that we were passed around, and shave that down to that size. Then your fletching, he takes a piece of string and ties it right here on the end. Well, he starts up here on this very end, and he's got to have both hands to do the turning. So he's holding the string in his teeth, and plus you're feeding this Scotch thistle on there at the same time. It's amazing to watch him do that. But as he's feeding this thistle onto the stick, he's wrapping it with the string that he's holding in his mouth. It's just like doing that right there, and that's the finished product right there. And he said a Cherokee Indian can make one of those in less than 5 minutes. They're just so good at what they do. And I've never been to a powwow where they had the dart or the gun shooting, But the Cherokees do have their powwows. They had one up in Rome not long ago. And they have the contest where they shoot the blowguns. And so it's a very entertaining thing to watch because they get back 50 or 60 feet and do what I did. Man, some of them, just amaze you at the distance that they can. It just depends on how much air you got or how long-winded you are. But you blow real hard, and that's proof enough right there. I'll take a short. It's 8:11, so I've used up probably my time already, and I'll open up the floor for questions. If anybody has a question, I'll try my best to answer it. If not, I can refer you to somebody that maybe can. Does anybody have any questions about what I've said or something that I didn't cover that you've always been curious about? I'll be glad to answer anything that I can.
You were talking about Charlietown before paying.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think it was?
I think it's somewhere out near Lewis Springs, out in that area, between Johnson Lake and Piedmont Highway. I didn't know that there were more springs. I thought Lewis Springs was a major spring out there, but there's a little road called Lewis Road. It's a dirt road that comes off Cornelius Road that joins Piedmont Highway also. And trying to think. Anyway, a guy built a new house there, and I was back over on his property, and I started walking around the edge of the property line, and there was just springs bubbling up everywhere. It makes the Blue Hole. That what's that little creek that you cross on where they built the new bridge on Johnson Lake Road? Pumpkin Pile Creek. Pumpkin, not pumpkin, but Pumpkin Pile. Well, those springs that feed that lake, feed that creek, are bubbling up right there. Dwayne West built a new house. That's the man's name. He built a new house off Lewis Road. So I think Charlietown is somewhere between Lewis Springs and Johnson Lake Road, or somewhere right along in there. But it's still a mystery, and I'm sure that it'd be of historical significance if somebody, the University of Georgia, I used to know where a lot of Indian sites were because I searched for them, and I went to the University of Georgia, to the state archaeologist at the state capitol, and I had documents of where these Indian sites were at, and I said, if you would please come and dig these and research them and because there might be a parking lot there or a shopping center before too long. He said, well, we've got all these sites mapped, but we just don't have the money appropriated to do the digs on them. So I said, well, it just needs to be done. He said, well, the money's just not there. So we might could find Charlietown, and they wouldn't even send anybody out to do any really historical research on that site. But it's just always been a mystery that I've always wondered about where is it at. And I'd love to find it just to see what's there.
You mentioned hematite. There's a little town, I think, somewhere on the back way to Alabama called Hematite. Back in the
Because it was heavily iron
Yeah.
mined,
Right.
and that's where the name came from, hematite. And in its natural form, and it's a real silver, metallic-looking metal, and they make jewelry out of it. My wife has several pieces of it. In its pure nugget form, it almost looks like chrome or something. It's real black and shining. It's just a real radiant-looking metal. But like I say, Polk County at one time was heavily mined on mined with mined for iron ore. There's all kind of ore washes. There's one down around go down Pryor Station behind the Etna Church there, back up in there to the left. There was a big iron ore mine right there at one time. And even the city dump out here, the old city dump behind where the city barn is now, that was a big, I was a small boy and saw them mine that myself. My uncle, he operated one of the steam shovels, and I'd go out there and just sit for hours watching them scoop up the dirt and haul it off in the dump trucks, So we're well blessed with minerals here in Polk County.
I'm from Macon, Georgia, and when I was a real young girl, I remember watching them excavate the mounds and dig up the Indian remains.
Okmulgee.
And they sent them to
I've
the
been there.
Smithsonian Institute.
Right. Well, the thing about the Smithsonian, and I've been there twice, is they have more stuff under the museum in boxes and in drawers and stuff than they'll ever be able to display, And that's the sad part about that. And the University of Georgia and places like that have a lot of Indian artifacts and things if they just had the building to display them. But that's where I fall out with a lot of the big universities and things. They don't build a building They're more concerned about the football and the stadiums and things than they are the history of their own state, you know, and you know, and the cultures and the Indians that lived here in Georgia. Etowah Mounds is a good place to go if you've never been there. It's a ceremonial Indian complex, you know. And I failed to mention, if you're interested in Indians and things like that, there's several books out on the market. This book is called Sun Circles in Human Hands, and you can buy that at the Etowah gift shop. It deals explicitly with Indians, the southeastern Indians, art and industry. Now I've got numerous books on the Plains Indians. I love to read about them because they were the daring knights on their horsemen, you know, and they had the buffalo stampedes and everything. But the Indians in our own area are quite interesting. And this gives the burial customs. It goes into the pipe making, pottery making, just arrowhead making. I mean, this is those big long blades I was telling you about that they found at Etowah Indian Mounds, 28 inches long. They found multiples of those. And it shows you, there, I was talking about how they chip an arrowhead. That goes into detail right there, in detail, how they chip the arrowhead. So this book is real informative, and it's written by two women archaeologists, and their names are Emma Funderburk and Mary Douglas Foreman. And they're from the University of Tennessee, I believe, is where they got their education. And that's the picture of them in the back of it there. But you don't think of women being interested in archaeology and digging up bones and things, but you'd be surprised the women that do have archaeological degrees or even geological degrees. But I would recommend this book to anybody that's just interested in Indians, old, you know, history and the cultures and the day-to-day life. Sun Circles in Human Hands. And this is Etowah Papers. This was written by Warren K. Moorhead. He was one of the first archaeologists to ever dig up the Mound C. That's the two marble statues. Now, a lot of people see these marble statues and they think, boy, that's really nice. You know, those weigh over 50 pounds apiece. Okay, the closest marble supply is Tate, Georgia, which I don't know how many miles that is as a crow flies, but they either had to transport this marble down there in rough blocks, and a rough block of marble would probably weigh 350 pounds to come up with a piece like that. So how those Indians, did they go up there to Tate and hack out these marble blocks? And then who was skilled enough to carve those statues like that? You know, it's a man and a woman, and they were buried with a priest over there at Etowah. But if you just sit down and think about it, they didn't have a train or a car or a wagon. They had to transport them down the Etowah River, I'm assuming. But somebody had to go up there and get the rough marble to make the statues, and then somebody had to carve the statues out. So there's quite an undertaking right there. And those are really interesting if you think about that. And they even have some of the actual paint, the red hematite, still on the marble statues themselves. It's survived over the years. They used charcoal and they used graphite for black. There's black, red, and then they use several different colors. But this shows you the different pottery vessels and things like that. And these are all vessels that were dug at the Etowah Indian Mound by this archaeologist, Warren K. Moorhead. That shows you some of the actual pits. I think Ms. Ayers said she went over there while they were doing that. She carried her sons over there, and her husband took them over there while they were actually doing the dig themselves. So she's got some fond memories of Etowah.